Stay tuned to meet a man who's been fired 13 times, never ever received a job promotion in 39 years of employment, and has been employed in most jobs only for a total of 3 years. You'll find out how his life has changed and how you can change yours as well. My name is Yvonne Lewis, and you're watching Urban Report. Hello and welcome to Urban Report. My guest today is Tim Allston. He's an author, speaker, and he wrote Introduction to Ego Holistic Recovering. Welcome again to Urban Report.
Thanks,
Tim.
Yvonne. Thank you.
I say again because you've been on Urban Report before. I think you were on with Jason and he interviewed you at ASI.
And you interviewed me at ASI in 2012 in Cincinnati. That's when I worked for Oakwood before it fired me for the 3rd time, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, see, we can laugh about that now, but I'm sure as it was happening, it wasn't funny. Yeah. Let's talk about you for a minute, your journey. You have been this remarkable PR person. I mean, I met you years ago, and I'd heard about you through my cousin Patty Conwell, who—
My mentor.
Oh, was she? Oh,
she's
wow. Is she your mentor?
Yeah, she likes to say that I'm her mentor, but she's really my mentor.
She's incredible. She's incredible. She had told me about you years ago, and then I met you for myself, and I just have been so impressed. And I think this is probably not good, given the fact that you wrote a bit on egotism. But anyway, I just have to say the gifts that God has given you have been enormous, and yet you call yourself a celebrated serial failure?
Yes.
Explain why.
Surely. Like you, Yvonne, I had everything. I was raised in a Christian home, loving Christian parents, raised us in church school, Seventh-day Adventist church school, but I did not appreciate the wealth that I had. And so after going through years of church school, going through all of that process, at the end of 9th grade, when I was in Greater Boston Academy, I got tired of being good. I got tired of being a good boy. I wanted to go out and to see what the world had to offer. And I begged my parents in that summer of 1969 at age 14, please let me leave church school to go to see if all of this background you've given me can stand the test of time. And so reluctantly, Thursday morning, July 24th, 1969, my father and I were riding in the car, and he said, Tim, he said, you've never really given us any real problems. You want to go to public high school, to our local public high school, Everett High School in Everett, Massachusetts. He said, for this first year, Mommy and I, your mother and I will allow you to go to public school. I was stunned because my parents believe in SDA education, and then there's nothing. They believe in the 3-braided cord, and that is church at home, church at school, church at church. And so for them to have made that decision, I was stunned. And what I did was sitting in my car, in my parents' car, in that 1961 Chevy Packwood station wagon, sitting in the passenger seat, I looked down at the dashboard clock. It was 11:38 in the morning, and I said, remember this is a red letter date. I was stunned. But then my father said something that was very prophetic. He said, Timmy, that's what they called me then, we know what's going to happen, but you need to experience it for yourself. Looking back now, it was arguably the worst decision I had ever made. There's nothing wrong with public school. However, I had been in faith-based school, all that formal education. In faith-based institutions, whether it's Seventh-day Adventist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Episcopal, the focus is on Jesus. Everything is measured up to Jesus. So it is Christ-centered or Christocentric. When you leave a faith-based environment, and for me, going to a public, even a private school, the emphasis is upon you, developing you, be all that you can be the best. So the focus is not Christ-centered, it's self-centered or egocentric. And what began then was a slow, imperceptible slide what I did was, and it resembled the prodigal son story. I said to my parents, give me my inheritance. So it was give me my space. So they gave me my S, my smarts, they gave me my P, my principles, they gave me my A, my sense of articulation, they gave me my C, my charm and charisma, and they gave me that E, which to some say I was probably easy on the eyes. So I took that SPACE and went out there, but because I had no spiritual moorings, I became the SPACE Space Cadet.
It's not funny.
It is. Looking back on it now, it's very funny. I mean, I achieved all kinds of things. I was a state oratorical champion. I lettered in sports. I got scholarships. But little by little by little, my spiritual moorings began to slip away. Went into college, the same kind of things. Became involved in my fraternity, became student body president, had job offers, but I began to slip away, little by little. So that three-braided cord first got broken by me leaving church school, and then when I went away to college and didn't go to a faith-based college, that was another cord that broke, and not being at home the third. So all three cords were broken. I was drifting, but I was pimping off of the values and experiences and exposures from a Christian home, a Christian school, and a Christian church. But little by little, it was eroding.
So you saw, when you made that decision, you had no idea that your persona was going to change.
None. My parents knew, and that's when my father made that prophetic statement to me, Timmy, we know what's going to happen, but you need to experience it for yourself. No, I had no idea. Because I was living that life. I was enjoying it. I was getting attention, acclaim, awards, speaking engagements, all types of different kinds of things that meant a lot to me as a young man, a young teenager, young adult. But my spiritual underpinnings were slipping away.
And so, as your parents saw this happening, were they saying to you, like, we see that you're changing? Or did they just kind of let you see for yourself that you were changing and just kind of not sweep it under the rug, but they might not have brought it to your attention?
In hindsight now, it grieved them, it pained them, and I'll give you an example. But they also understood that he's an adult, he's got to make his own adult decisions. We could tell him what to do, but he needs to experience this for himself. But the other part of it, they sincerely believed, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he gets old, he will not depart from it, even though it took this person 40 years to get there. Let me give you an example. When I was in college, my grades started slipping, yet the school was still sending me out on speaking engagements to alumni, to this, that, and the other, until my mother, who was an academic, working at Oakwood College, sent a letter to the school and forbid them from sending me any more trips because she said I was not academically representing them. Reluctantly, they went along with it, but they knew that I was representing them on the surface of things. So they, in their own way, were allowing me a level of independence, but they never stopped praying. Anytime I would call home, which was few and far between because I was living that life, phone conversations were always punctuated with the statement, Timmy, we love you and we're praying for you. And that was the chewing gum and baling wire that held me together against my own wishes.
Did you continue to go to church when you went away to college?
Now, see, that's an ugly question. That's an ugly
Especially
question.
since your mom was sitting in the audience
Yeah,
right
that's
here,
an ugly
right?
question. Let me tell you what I would do. If I knew I was going back home, and by this time my family had moved from Greater Boston to Huntsville, Alabama, where mom and dad accepted administrative staff positions at Oakwood College, which is my mother's alma mater. Whenever I would go home to visit, shame on me, I would attend church the Sabbath before so that I could at least be up on whatever the issues were in the church. So whenever I rolled home, I would at least be somewhat conversant if something came up. I mean, I can remember, you're really pulling the scab off now. I mean, I can remember times when I would call home and mom would say, she would wait till the end of the conversation and she would say, have you been to church? And I would say, Mom, I said, I was just too tired to go to church, or if I go to church, I'm gonna fall asleep and I know it in service. And so she would say, well, Typically, you fall asleep on Sabbath if you were too busy on Friday night.
Oh, oh, Mom.
But she was the first one to bust me. She was the one when they had decided we're not paying any more tuition to that good school, when we have a school that's training people for the kingdom, and I made the decision I'm not coming. My mother said to me, she said, yeah, we don't have all the things that your alma mater has. We don't, so our young ladies, they wear long skirts, they carry big Bibles, they wear no makeup. We don't have all the allurements of that other school. She said, Hampton, which was my school, Hampton, I said, it's not your problem. Your ego is your problem. You can't see yourself coming to little bitty Oakwood. And I dismissed it. But it came back to bite me some 32 years later.
So you never did go to Oakwood?
Never attended Oakwood.
Because you thought that Oakwood was not, it didn't measure up for you?
Didn't have all the horns and whistles. You know, I regret it now. I mean, when I finally married, ultimately married, and my wife, who was an Oakwood grad, we went back to our first alumni weekend in 1995 as husband and wife. She introduced me to her friends, and my wife is very much unlike me. She's very unpretentious, very, very unpretentious, very much a wallflower, very much in the shadows, unlike me. But she would introduce me to some of her best friends in school. Some people who were real close, people who played softball with her, people that, you know. As we're driving back, and I was working at Hampton, Virginia at the time, I began to think about, recap the weekend. And there was something that I noticed about the majority of her friends. The majority of her friends all had the same first name, Doctor. Dr. Reggie Croupwood, Dr. Dwayne Harrison, Dr. Kathy Arthur. And I said to myself, I could have been like that, but I went to school, went to college, not for the pursuit of happiness. I went for the happiness of pursuit. And when I look back on it now, you know, I should have a granddaughter or grandson in college if I had been focused. But I was so busy trying to run away from all of those basics my parents instilled and embedded within me. I was running in the opposite direction. You know, I should have been more focused, but I was trying my best not to be. But God allowed me down this path until I hit rock bottom and woke up.
And let's talk about that. Before we get there, though, let's talk about where God had taken you to hit rock bottom from.
God had allowed me to, upon graduation, even though I graduated with a 2.2 average, which was basically a C minor. Yeah, I had 7 job offers. Why did I have 7 job offers? Because I was pimping that SDA culture from all of those years in Sabbath school, learning memory verses, reciting all of them for 13th Sabbath, for whenever there was a youth day program, being that speaker, and from growing up in church and church school where everything boiled down to principles. As a result, I went to college and I became an English major. And I became an English literature major. And the reason I became that is because I would go into class, had not read the literature, could not answer who said what to whom, but any question that was philosophic in nature, because it all boiled down to principles. So I was pimping the culture of being an Adventist. I was pimping that culture. So as a result of that, I ended up working for the world's largest public relations firm in New York, Burson Marsteller, in 1977. Received the top award, the Silver Anvil Award, part of my team, which was the Oscar. The next month I got fired.
Why did you get fired?
As
you got the Oscar, for public relations. Why did you get fired?
As my mentor told me, who recruited me, Tim, you were more of a personality than a professional.
Unpack that for us.
I was the good times guy. I mean, I was the one who was leading the parties whenever we had parties. I was the socialite at the receptions. You know, I had just enough writing skills to get by. I was in media relations. I was one who would book media for different clients, book different shows like Good Morning America. So I knew how to sell. But in terms of being a marathon runner, a long distance person, I was so busy skimming off of the top. After a while, in 1978, when we had an economic recession, the economy swung down, I was not necessary. I got swung out. That happened again some 6 years later when I went to work for Hill & Knowlton, which is then the world's largest public relations firm, headquartered in Chicago. I had just in 1986 won the John Hill Award, the top award for the company. 5 months later, I was fired. The same thing. And what I learned was the fact I was good enough to get in, but not excellent enough to move up.
But how did you get those awards if you weren't performing adequately? How did you get awards for performance and then get fired?
My belief is this, and I'm glad you asked. God always had a plan for me, whether I could see it or not. And I had an experience in 1977 with my college fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. I was a national officer. I was on the board of directors. I was speaking around the country. And I watched at our final banquet that year, a new president came in, and he gave an award to the director of conventions, who had been director of conventions for 30 years or so. I didn't think much of it. I was a 22-year-old hotshot kid. I'm sitting next to my mentor, who was the legal counsel for the fraternity. He said, "This is interesting, Tim." I said, "Why?" He says, "Typically, when you get an award for doing your job, it's the way that corporations learn how to get rid of you." I said, whoa. I didn't think a lot of it then. But as I began to watch the trajectory of my life, whenever I would get an award, as I look back on it now in hindsight, that was the way to move me out. It was God's way to say, "You've gotten as much as you can get from here. I'm moving you out to get you ultimately to where I want you to be for my glory." This message that I've been able to put together, this book that I've been able to write, is God's gift to me and my gift back to God, to be able to tell people about a problem that affects all of us. And as I look at the trajectory of my life, I go back to John 9, when Jesus and the disciples are walking down the road and they run into a blind man. And the disciples say, "Jesus, who sinned? Was it this man or was it his parents that caused him to be blind?" Jesus said, "Neither." He said, "But he is blind," in verse 3, "neither, but that the works of God can be displayed in him," and then God healed him. I believe sincerely, Yvonne, God has allowed this egoholism, which is an addiction to self, in me, to be exposed to people, to be that first mouthpiece, to be the poster child for it, in an effort to help to heal other people. It is my blindness that God has healed or is healing. So the question I ask people is, what is the blindness in you that God has put in you, that allowed in you, so that once you give yourself and get broken down and get humble before God, he can reveal it and you can help to save mankind. That's my story about all the firings.
Yes. The book, and we have a cover so that people can take a look at it. Tell us a bit about the book. What led you to write this book? And by the way, when you see your name, you want your name in all lower caps. You don't want it in uppercase. You want it all lowercase.
That's right.
What led you to write this book?
I left Oakwood. Well, Oakwood fired me for the first time, first of 3 firings.
Okay, let's unpack that a minute and then go to the book.
Okay. Because of my experience in higher education, technically, chronologically, I had more experience, more exposure than the president, and I let him know that on a regular basis. I did not learn the first rule of thumb in terms of power, which is you never outshine your master. And so that was a bitter pill for me to swallow. But it led me into entrepreneurship because I learned from a mentor of mine that entrepreneurship is one of the closest ways to get to God. Because when you're an entrepreneur, you have no safety net.
That's right.
You have no institutional budget, you have no staff, it's just you and alone. And in that alone time, that wilderness, that's when God speaks to us many times. It's not for everybody, but for those of us who can and do, that's where God works through us. So I went out and grabbed my first contract. I'd never seen that much money before, and I said, finally someone's gonna appreciate my worth and value. I lost the contract in 6 weeks.
Oh, ouch.
At the Dear John, at the Dear John meeting, the client said to me, Tim, you needed help and you wouldn't ask for any. Firing you is one of the best things that could happen to you as a first-time, early-stage entrepreneur. He said, because talent is not your problem. So I'm saying, well, if talent ain't my problem, then what is my problem? At the same time, I'd gotten a letter in the mail, Dear Servant Leader. That caught my attention because I was in a servant leader reading group. The woman wrote about she was a professional speech coach, and my thing was to become a professional speaker. And in reading the letter and in getting in touch with her, I decided to go meet with her. And in meeting with her, we began to talk out themes. Her name is Yvonne LT, out of Dallas, Texas. She wrote the book on Zig Ziglar, who was probably the most phenomenal public speaker, motivational speaker of the 20th century. In meeting with her and talking with her, she's a Christian business counselor, we were talking about different kinds of themes, different kinds of experiences, and she said something to me. She said, Tim, you are so articulate, you are so charismatic. When you walked in the room, your presence fills the room. And I stopped her. I said, yes. I said, I am articulate, I am charismatic, I do have a persona that fills the room. I've gotten away with that all of my life until I got married, and my wife lets me get away with nothing. And then God sent this word through me. I said, I guess I am an egoholic who needs to recover. And she stopped me. She said, Tim, let me tell you something. She said, I have heard every kind of speech there is to hear. Nobody is addressing that topic. That's in your spiritual DNA. Run with it. So I was writing on this topic for some 14 years, 17 drafts, 4 different editors, trying to get this message out there. Couldn't figure out why I couldn't. Through all the different firings, I'm saying, surely the Lord is calling me now to go out here, to get this book out here, to write this book, to save the world. When I got fired from DirecTV in 2010, I just knew that was the moment. But I tried to get it designed. I tried, I couldn't. I went to my pastor at my church, Pastor Benjamin Jones. I said, why? He said, Tim, God always prepares the minister before the ministry. I said, ooh. That's when I just backed up. Then I was asked to come back to Oakwood to work. The new president come on board, Dr. Leslie Pollard, had worked very well, famously well, for a good 2 years or so, and then got canned. He called me into the office. I'll never forget it. It was Monday, December 16, 2013. A few hours after that, we were getting ready to have the annual Christmas party when people gave out bonuses. So this ego says, well, he must be calling me in to reward me because we just won the Home Depot campaign. I was the architect of that. I've outdistanced any other PR person here, which was Tim Allston before that. He called me in to fire me. He said to me, he says, Tim, on my campus, I've got 2 geniuses with problems. You're one of them. Get help now. I'm like, whoa. I had this body of work I've been working on, stuff I've been writing for all these years. I said, that's probably the signal from God. So I went to go see professional counseling to deal with the issue that he had suggested. He said, Tim, I'm not a medical doctor. He said, but you may want to look at the issue of a narcissistic personality disorder. I'm like, whoa, that sounds severe. So I met with the counselor. We worked through some things, and I began to then write. As it turned out, the presidential campaign of 2016 rolled around. And a mentor of mine, a friend of ours, Attorney Sherman Rogers, said to me, October 1, he said, Tim, you've been writing this book for 14 years. Writing it. He says, I'm giving you an ultimatum. October 31st, this book needs to be out. It needs to be out before the elections for obvious reasons. I said, okay, yes, sir. Right away, counselor. And so with the run for the presidency and ultimately election of a Donald Trump, I began to see the perfect timing of God. And I say that because to the casual observer, they say, oh, Donald Trump has a big ego. But upon closer observation, he's got a very thin, frail ego. The question that I pose, I'm about to write a piece now entitled The American Ego Has Landed. And then my subtitle is going to be, But the Disciples Asked, Lord, is it I? Up at the Last Supper, Jesus said, one of you all will betray me. 11 of the disciples were startled. Lord, is it I? Although initially Jesus was talking about Judas, ultimately all of the other 11 did betray him. So the question that I will pose to my readers is, for all the things you dislike about this man, Lord, is it I? Are you guilty of being brash? Are you guilty of being nationalistic? Are you guilty of being chauvinistic? Are you guilty of saying things you can't back up? As a recovering egoholic, I always ask myself, Lord, is it I? And unfortunately, Yvonne, I am guilty of all of those crimes. You know, earlier this year, I teach a Bible study class at my church, First SDA Church in Huntsville, Alabama, and we were studying the life of Peter. So I asked my class, I said, what do you know about Peter? They said he was brash, nationalistic, hot-tempered, running off at the mouth. I said, who does that remind you of? And someone said, Trump. I said, okay. I said, nationalistic, chauvinistic, brash, making promises he couldn't keep. I said, what is the difference between Peter and Donald Trump? And they said, he humbled himself. I said, yes. I said, could all of this be God's effort to humble this man? I said, have you been brash? Have you been nationalistic? Have you been chauvinistic, whether by word or by deed? Does Peter speak to you? Did you see what God did with Peter? Peter developed a spirit of humility and teachability. So as I understand Peter, and as I understand our new president, Donald Trump, God has also helped me to understand Tim Allston. And I ask the question every day, painfully, Lord, is it I? The answer is not a comfortable one.
At what point did you realize that I know you've been working on this book for 14 years, but at what point did you realize that I have got to give God total control of my life? What was the precipitating event that made you decide to turn over your life to the Lord?
I don't think it was any single event. Like the hymn that we sang as children, each victory will help you some other to win. I believe it's been a series of events. In every single way, I watch God impact in terms of my marriage, in terms of our daughter, in terms of her upbringing, in terms of everything I was doing. I began to see how my egoholism was draining them, that they were not being all that they could be, and that I was an impediment to them. And so I reached the point now, I don't trust Tim Allston. I don't trust him. I know that rascal. I know what he will and what he won't do. So therefore, I have gotten very deliberate, almost mechanical. I pray about everything. I pray when I get up in the morning to wake our daughter up. I pray when I fix family breakfast. I pray before I have family worship, all the time, because I know that I'm exceedingly evil. The Apostle Paul says it in Romans 7, verse 15. I'm full of sin. I know what I can do. I want to do right, but I can't do right. When I try to do right, I do wrong. And when I want to do wrong, he pushes me to try to do right. I'm in a world of trouble, and I understand this. One of the things about being an egoholic was not caring, was thinking that I was all that. But one of the things about being a recovering egoholic is I become exceedingly aware of how sinful I am and how small I am to God. That's why when you see my name written, it's written in all lowercase letters. I don't feel worthy to be capital about anything.
So what would you say are the symptoms of egoholism?
Well,
how do you know? How does one know that one is an egoholic?
Okay. Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with having an ego. every dictionary defines an ego as a sense of self. So therefore, every person, every organization, every event, every activity has a sense of self. Where the egoholism comes in is when we put too much of ourself in. For example, when God made us, he made us perfect. But in that perfection, our perfection was tied to him. When we sinned, we broke that. And so everything we do, everything you do, everything I do, there's always a sense of incompleteness. What happens is we're incomplete. And the completion can only come when we team with the undefeated partner, God. Our problem comes in when we come into any situation, we try to fill ourselves with what has to happen. We need to partner with God. But only God knows the exact divine calibrations to put in more of him or less of us. Only God knows that. Egoholism comes about when either we put too much of ourselves in, which is big ego, or put too little of ourselves, which is little ego. We try to do that. And God dispenses himself to us in a measure proportion to our faith. So what God has shown me, first of all, through the Bible. The Bible is that mirror. Actually, it's a two-way mirror. It really shows me my exuding sinfulness. And what the Bible has shown Tim Allston is my major egoholisms are the acronym SPAIDS, S-P-A-I-D-E-S. Selfishness, procrastination, arrogance, I is called impression mismanagement. I'll come back to that. D is disorganization. E is poor eye contact. And S is selfishness. I am bracketed by selfishness. When I talk about impression mismanagement, for example, I once saw a sign on a teacher's wall when I was in college, and it said prosperity, spending money you don't have to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't even like.
I like that.
Yeah. That's clearly a sign of low esteem, low or no esteem. Mm-hmm. So when I read my Bible, to answer your question, it points me to, it pulls the cover off of Bible characters, which force me to say, Lord, is it I? I got a little Judas Iscariot in me. I have a little Saul of Tarsus in me. I have a little Saul, King Saul in me. I have a little Adam and Eve. I have a little Moses in me. You begin to see yourself in Bible characters, and thank God that he's given us the Bible, which is his love letter to the human race, to point out those. That's the first truth teller I talk about in book number 1. But the other truth tellers are people, events, and activities that reveal us to us, typically in a painful way. The decisions that we make, they reveal us to us. Our job is to make the corrections. Our job is to look at our history, to glance at our history. There's nothing you can do about what's in the past other than to look at it, to either decide to repeat it or to repulse it. And that's the beauty of history. So step 1 of my book says to change lanes effectively, glance back quickly before driving forward. Don't spend all your time looking backwards. Living in the past like living with the dead. And that's the essence of step 1 of the recovery process.
And in fact, that was going to be my next question. What are the steps in recovery?
Okay, well.
Step 1, you just gave us.
I'm still recovering. So those steps I call the Tim Commandments.
The Tim Commandments. Okay, all right.
There are 7 steps, but there are 3 that precede that. It's called TOP, top, take it to the top. T, target the problem. It's not a problem until you are willing to admit that it's a problem. The example I use is of the retired veteran anchor for Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer. In 2003, he was diagnosed with having cancer, and he said the toughest part of having cancer was being able to say to himself, I have cancer. We've got to learn, as Ellen White says, to call sin by its right name. So we got to call it out. If James Baldwin says, you can't fix what you won't face. So we have to call it what it is. So T, target, put a bullseye on it, saying, selfishness is a problem for me. So I'm very, very aware of it. Procrastination is the problem. I'm very, very well aware of it. Arrogance, that uber sense of self, I'm aware of that. Impression mismanagement, being disorganized. My wife can talk about that. Poor eye contact and selfishness again. I'm aware, and so therefore God has been able to show those to me. That's step 1. Step 2 talks about uncover buried, hidden treasures in your life by digging deeper below the surface. I use the example here of Michelangelo, the Italian sculptor. And someone once asked him, how did you create this magnificent structure, the sculpture of David, out of this large piece of marble? Michelangelo said, David was always in that piece of marble. My job was to chip away the excess rock.
I like that.
When we allow God to chip away the excess rock in our life, we will find the beauty within us and also some of the ugliness. Step 3 says that we will fast forward our success by homework listening. In this, I point out the fact that listening is something that we learn. None of us were born, most of us are poor listeners. And the reason for that is very, very simple. In school, we were required to take courses in reading, writing, speaking, but never once, I don't know of a school in the country, college or university, high school anyway, that teaches listening. It is the foundation of what we do. We learn nothing by talking. We learn everything by listening. My roommates told me my freshman year in college, they said, Tim, you're a good speaker, but you're a poor listener. When you become a better listener, you'll become a better speaker. It took me 30 years to learn listening requires humility. You have to know that you don't know something and ask, and therefore people then can give that to you. That's step 3. Step 4.
Well, before you go there, it's interesting that you would say that because there's active listening and passive listening. You know, you can just, like, even in this situation, we have to listen to each other. I have to listen to what you're saying, you have to listen to what I'm saying so that you can respond, and vice versa. And yet, people can go through a day and not really hear each other. Family members can go through life not really listening to each other. So
I'm guilty.
It's a critical thing that we listen, and that we listen actively to what someone is saying. And as you just said, if your ego is involved, you're not going to really listen to what somebody else has to say because you don't really see the value in what somebody else has to say. Not you, but
No, you're right. No, you're right. No, it's me. It's
well,
me.
I'm just saying, you know, in general, if you don't see the value in what someone else has to say, and you feel that you have the most important thing to contribute, you're not going to really listen. And that's a huge mistake that people make.
I remember an example that happened back in 1988 when George H.W. Bush was running for president. Barbara Bush was on the road, and she went up to Milwaukee to speak to a group of educators. But for some strange reason, her speech didn't go with her. She didn't have the speech to give, and so she was able to pivot on her own. And she turned to these educators, because she was talking about an educational initiative for her husband, and she turned to them and said, what are the educational issues here in the state of Wisconsin? And they were more than happy to feed her information that ultimately became a part of the platform. Because that's one thing that I've learned. When you talk, you immobilize yourself.
What do you mean?
When you talk, you're giving out. We learn nothing by talking. We learn everything by listening. So while I'm talking to you right now, I am immobilizing myself, and you are mobilizing yourself against me. I mean, you're coming up with questions based on what I've said, what kind of cues I may have given. And so the more we listen, the more we learn. You know, we think we learn a lot, but we learn nothing by talking. When Ruth Simmons became the president of Brown University, the first African-American president of an Ivy League school, story says that she spent the first 6 months just walking around office to office to office, just listening. And then she put together her program for leading the school because she listened to the people, listened to the little people who were more than happy because they'd never been listened to before. And she listened actively and put that information together. And so I'm recovering, and because I'm a speaker. And speakers have a bad habit of speaking and not listening. And we need to learn to develop greater listening skills. Last point, the same letters that make up the word listen are the same letters that make up the word silent.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, we are, and see the joy, but here's the joy. We learned how to listen. and we learned how to be poor listeners, we can learn now how to become better listeners.
Right. Right.
Step number 4 says that we need to restart our engines for better mileage. And here I talk about we all need to grow up to be children.
Okay, explain that.
Okay. There is an honesty and an innocence and a transparency about children. They will let you know when they hurt. They'll let you know when you've got bad breath. They'll let you know when, they'll let you know when someone is not treating them right. You know, they have little to no pretense about them. We will develop and we will grow when we can get rid of all the pretense that we have, and we've got lots of it. I've got it, we all have it. But if we can ever learn to start over again, being willing to start over again. It's not easy, but here's the key. We don't have to do it alone. That's the key to egoholism recovering. You can't cure it, you can't solve it, you can't eliminate it, but with God's help, God will help you to manage it. I talk about management just like when I came in here to 3AB building, the grass was very well manicured. It didn't just get like that. And just because it got cut maybe earlier this week, it's not going to be like that this week, next week, this time. It has to be cut or managed. You know, your hair looks very pretty. I love the flow of it and everything.
Oh, thank
you. You didn't just wake up this morning with it, boom, like that.
No.
You had to work with that, you know, unlike mine. You had to work with it. That's management. Well, God works with us. I will always, Yvonne, be selfish. I will always be a procrastinator. I will always, because it's in my DNA. And it's like Paul with the thorn in his flesh. God said, no, you need to keep that so that you will stay humble. I will always have those problems that spades. But through recovering, God is showing me how to manage it. It's the way I talk about the common cold, the way I talk about cancer. We hear people in church saying, I'm cancer-free, and we all go, hallelujah. The reality is, all of us have cancer cells in us. All of us. So all of us have cancer. When it gets to an excessive level, that's when it says we've got cancer. And then we go to the hospital, get treatment, and get things done to bring it down to a certain level so that we're not in a danger zone. It's the same with the common cold. We hear some talk about some pharmaceutical company that's invented something to cure the common cold. No. The common cold is going to be here, but what we learn to do is manage it, because it's going to come back next year. Weeds in your garden, they're going to come back next year. We learn to manage it, the same with ego. God will help us to manage it. Step 5 talks about, I love step 5, it says, turn your lemons into lemonade. In this, I talk about, and I have a piece in there entitled, How He Went from Barack Bottom to the White House. You know, when he lost the congressional race to Bobby Rush back in 2000, the seeds of that loss became the foundation for his win. When he looked through that race, he began to notice the fundraising acumen of the little black churches in Chicago South Side, how older women and people would just give small donations on a regular basis. We as Seventh-day Adventists call that systematic benevolence. And he learned that, and he became the greatest fundraiser in political history, and the rest is history. So we've got to learn to turn our lemons into lemonade. One of the examples I love to use is what I call your Mount Moriah moments, taken out of the story of Abraham and Isaac. Bottom line, everything is a test. Everything is a test. The beauty of the test is that God is the test maker. God is the test giver. God administers the test. And when you and I fail, as we often do, God gives us a makeup exam. And God surrounds us with people who become our study group. And he is such a good test maker that he gives us the answers in advance. That's the beauty.
Nice, nice.
Step 6 says our healing is in our revealing. In this, I talk about Hillary Clinton, for example, and how in her first autobiography, everybody wanted to read about Monica Lewinsky. The biggest part of the book was in page 764, when she said, I insisted that Bill and I go to counseling to save our marriage. She became a heroine to about 700,000 couples a year in America that go to counseling. So in her revealing, she began to heal people. And I say in the book, you begin to heal people when you tell your story. And step 7
Wait, before you go there, it's important to tell your story, not just to heal people, but it also heals you.
Oh, yes.
Because you become, when you're transparent and you tell what God has done for you, it all goes back to what has God done for you. So it's not even you per se, but it's what God has done. It's how, in this situation, how he has shined a light on areas that you need work in, areas that I need work on. That's what he does. That's the Holy Spirit's job, to convict us of sin. And so what is sin? It's self. And so we all are egoholics.
Yes, we are.
That's
Yes,
the
we
bottom
are.
line. We're all egoholics. We're all sinners in need of a Savior. So he has enabled you to write these books with these steps to help to get victory over self.
Yes. And the first victory is right here, because as I become transparent, as God shines through me, I can't help but share. It's not pretty, it's not easy, it's very, very self-condemning, but it will help to heal people from the comments that I get from people, you know. But you're right. And step number 7, the final step says, now that you know, go, elevate, and grow. Write your story. Write your story. Thoughts disentangle themselves when they pass through your fingertips. You have a story to tell. Now, I throw a bonus in there. It's an 8-book series. Book number 7 is entitled, What Happened to Dr. Tim Allston? I was working on my doctorate. I had just gotten my dissertation topic approved. I had a 99 average in my class. I had one more class to go. I was rolling. And then
You had one class left.
had one class left.
Whew.
Had just gotten a dissertation approved. Had a 99 average in the class. I was on the fast track. And on Tuesday, February 24th, 2015, Oakwood fired me for the 3rd and final time. And my wife said, and I told my wife, she said, well, since that money's not coming in, would you consider sitting out a semester from school? I mean, I'm right at the end of the line, and I didn't want to hear that, but I said, let me pray about it, because I began to stop trusting myself. That was on Tuesday, February 24th. On Wednesday, we had a snowstorm in Huntsville. Not like snowstorms here in downstate Illinois. I mean, we had an inch, and that shut down Huntsville.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I get up to shovel out our driveway. You know, my wife and I are from Maryland and Virginia, so we had the only shovel on the whole block in Huntsville. So there's a lady and her daughter across the street, and they don't have an adult male, so I shovel out my driveway, I shovel theirs out. So I'm having this conversation with God, like going like, what's up? You know, I'm at the end of this doctoral program, and all of a sudden you just yanked the carpet. God said, why were you in the doctoral program in the first place? I'm going like, what? I said, I'm in higher education, and in higher education, the doctorate is the union card. He said, mm-hmm. He said, what are you going to do your dissertation on? I said, I thought about initially doing it on this egoholism. He said, but you changed. Yes, I said, I changed. He said, why? He said, because I didn't want a committee, a dissertation committee of atheists chopping, slicing, and dicing on your word. He said, I'm smart. He said, what did you then choose to do it on? I said, I want to do it on how to market adult education to faith-based, historically black colleges and universities, which are the most financially strapped schools in the country. He said, and what were you going to do with that dissertation? I said I was going to roll that into a book and then use it as a marketing tool to consult with all these different schools. He said, mm-hmm. He said, I see. He said, let me ask you a question, Tim. If you had done all of those things and put that book out and done this consulting, who would have gotten the credit, the doctorate or me? I said, whoa. I said, but wait a minute, Lord. I said, you got me in, you allowed me to get into this doctoral program. I said, and I'm getting mad with the Lord now. I said, I'm shoveling and mad. Mm-hmm. I said, I've just kicked out $26,460 in this doctoral program. Don't you want me to be a good steward, Lord? Mm-hmm. You know, and God said, let me ask you a question. What was your work experience at the institution? I said, it was terrible. I said I would do proposals I wouldn't get answered to, this, that, and the other. He said, was it frustrating? I said, yes. He said, people that get as frustrated as you would get, what do? I said, they smoke, they drink, they get high, they gamble, they have affairs. He said, did you? I said, no. He said, what did you do? I said, I talked about that institution like a dog on those papers I was writing, because I knew they'd never seen them. He said, and how did you do? I said, I got A's on those papers. He said, okay. I said, but God, you took away the research site, you took away which is the gas station, you took away the vehicle, the car, and you're taking away the gas. He said, mm-hmm. He said, the purpose of you doing that doctorate was not for you to get a doctorate. It was for you to amicably work out your frustrations. And now that the frustration is gone, you don't need the doctorate anymore. He said, when I send a message through you, and that message is not that doctoral dissertation, it's the egoholism recovering message, I don't want anything or anybody getting credit for you but me. Not a doctorate, not an institution, not 100 Black Men of America, not Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, not Hampton, not Oakwood. I said, I only want the credit. I said, oh. And God said, one last question for you, Tim. He said, if you had smoked, if you had drunk, if you had gotten high, if you had gambled, if you'd had an affair, how much money would you have spent? And I said, oh my word, $26,460. I said, I get it. Finished shoveling, went in, and withdrew from Capella University and never looked back. So that book is entitled, Whatever Happened to Dr. Tim Allston? And God showed me, I am a jealous God, mine is a divine jealousy, and only I will get credit for your recovering.
Wow. Wow. And so after you'd had that dialogue with the Lord, were you at total peace about it? Or were you still feeling like, well, could we just revisit this?
Shoveling snow that day was a wilderness experience. Just him, the snow, and me. And I've learned about the wilderness experience from Dr. John Maxwell, that in the wilderness is where your backbone gets solidified, your calling gets clarified, and your motives get purified. In that short 2-hour wilderness experience, when God dropped that on me, it was almost as though we were an audible conversation. I never had a second thought. It was like, boom. Never regretted not having that doctorate, because I understood that doctorate, for some, that's fine. And I'm glad that you've got a doctorate in natural therapy. But for me, it would have been a distraction from doing expressly. God wanted me to be totally stripped down so that all I could do was look at him. Not a doctorate, not an organization, not a guaranteed check. He wanted me to be out here as broke as the 10 Commandments and simply serve him. I get it.
Wow, wow. So where are you now in your journey? What does God have you doing at this point?
Right now, I have produced the book, self-published, and I've launched it as a free book.
And how can people get it?
They simply go to my website, which is www.getegohelpnow.org. And there they're able to download their free copy of the book.
Getegohelpnow.org. And it's free.
It's free. It's free.
You can't get any better than free.
You really can't. You really, really can't. And the reason it's free, Yvonne, is that I'm dealing with a brand new concept. See, if you were to write a book from your background as a vocalist, as a teacher, as a hostess of a show, as a manager of this network, your book would be written about success. And people would buy your book because you're successful. I'm a serial failure. No one wants to buy a book about a failure. So therefore, because we don't value failures in this society, but it is a concept that is very, very applicable and intimate to everybody, I give it to people free because I want them to, it's my seed sowing. I want them to chew on and let the idea, the concept marinate with them. And I don't want a cost to be a prohibition or to be an impediment. Now, the 8-book series that's coming after that will not be free. As I say, I'll move people from free to shining fee.
From free.
From free to shining fee.
Shining fee.
You know.
Okay, but this initial book is free.
It is free.
And it's an
totally free.
ebook.
It's an ebook.
So
And it's a one-sitting read. You can read the book in 30 minutes.
Yes.
It's a 27-page book. Now, let me throw this in. Because most people are going to read it on a mobile device or an electronic device, I've taken this 27-page book and I've stretched it. Some pages only have one paragraph on it, you know. But I want people to be able to read it, to pray on it, to see if it relates to them, for them to ask themselves some penetrating, some searing questions, and to go from there. And I knew that I needed to get past the gatekeeper. And the gatekeeper was, my biggest competitor is tradition.
how so?
Well, first of all, people don't believe they have ego problems, first of all. Number two, people think that if you talk about an ego problem, if it's going to be discussed, it's got to be with a doctor, a clinical therapist, an academic professor, an ordained minister, even possibly a lawyer. As I say in the book, I'm not a doctor. I'm the patient. I'm not an ordained pastor. I'm the sinner in the pew. I'm not a clinical therapist. I'm the client. You know, I'm not the professor. I'm the student who needs advisement. I'm not the lawyer. I'm the victim. And unfortunately, have also been the perpetrator. So this book is about Tim Allston without deodorant. Tim Allston without mouthwash. It is raw honesty. And it is unique because it's told from the other side of the desk.
So many people, I mean, everybody has experienced on some level some kind of failure. That's how you learn. But we're so thankful that with you, Tim, that you've taken these areas of life that have been challenges for you, and God has given you this desire to share with others the places in which you failed, and yet it just brings inspiration and hope. I read the book and I was blessed by it and appreciate your journey.
Thank you.
So we appreciate, what is it, well, I can't believe our time is up. I just looked at the clock and it's like.
Let me say this quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
My wife, Elaine, will tell you that I'm not recovered.
Okay. You're on the road.
I'm on the road.
You're on the road, though.
And my daughter will tell you that I'm not out the woods. But thanks be to God, I am escaping, and I ask everybody to join me in my getaway.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And make sure you order that book. Go to
www.getegohelpnow.org.
It's been a blessing. And thank you for joining us. Make sure that you order this book. It's going to be a blessing for you and inspirational too. Oh, I can't believe that we've reached the end of another program. Join us next time, because it just wouldn't be the same without you.